Trapped by a snowstorm in the maintenance building, Emma and Jack find themselves forced to work together, their early misconceptions beginning to crack like the ice outside. Looks like things are about to heat up in this winter wonderland, and I'm not talking about the fireplace. Chapter 4. Misunderstandings and Muffins. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the mountain air sharp with the promise of snow. Emma, still jet-lagged and slightly disgruntled from yesterday's encounter, found herself in the lodge's rustic kitchen far earlier than any of the other guests. She breathed in the quiet, relishing the solitude as she rummaged through the well-stocked pantry.
Might as well make myself useful,
she murmured, pulling out flour, sugar, and other baking essentials. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and nutmeg, as Emma lost herself in the familiar rhythm of measuring, mixing, and folding. She was so engrossed in her task that she didn't hear the kitchen door swing open.
Well, well,
A now familiar voice drawled.
if it isn't the turkey whisperer.
Emma stiffened, turning to find Jack leaning against the doorframe, a steaming mug in his hand. His hair was delightfully mussed, and he wore a faded MIT sweatshirt that had seen better days. The casual attire was a far cry from yesterday's polished look, and Emma found herself momentarily disarmed.
Good morning, Mr. Montgomery.
She said, aiming for cool politeness.
I see you've managed to survive the night without any poultry-related incidents.
Jack winced slightly.
Yeah, about that. I wanted to apologize. The prank was a bit much, especially for guests who'd just arrived.
Emma blinked, surprised by the sincere apology.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the soft whir of the oven fan. Jack cleared his throat, gesturing to the array of bowls and ingredients spread across the counter.
So, what's all this, stress baking?
Hardly.
Emma replied, then paused.
Well, maybe a little. It's a habit I picked up during my residency. There's something soothing about following a recipe, you know? A pinch of this, a cup of that, and voila. Order from chaos.
Jack's eyes lit up with unexpected interest.
That's exactly how I feel about coding. It's all about taking these abstract concepts and turning them into something tangible, something that works.
For a moment, they shared a look of mutual understanding. Then Emma shook herself, remembering her resolve to keep her distance from the immature prankster.
Yes, well, I suppose there are similarities, though I doubt my muffins have ever caused a panic.
Jack laughed, the sound warm and genuine.
Touché, Dr. Rossi. Though I bet your muffins could cause a stampede once people get a whiff.
He inhaled deeply, his appreciation evident.
What are these anyway? They smell amazing.
Cinnamon apple,
Emma replied, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice.
with a streusel topping. It's my grandmother's recipe.
Sounds delicious. Any chance a repentant turkey hacker could snag one?
Emma found herself smiling despite her best efforts.
Well, since you asked so nicely, here, make yourself useful.
She tossed him an apron.
You can help me with the streusel topping.
To her surprise, Jack caught the apron deftly and slipped it on without protest.
Yes, ma'am. What do you need me to do?
As Emma walked him through the steps of mixing the streusel, she couldn't help but notice how quickly he picked up the techniques. His hands, which she'd assumed were only good for tapping on keyboards, moved with unexpected grace as he worked the butter into the flour and sugar.
You're not half bad at this,
she admitted, watching him sprinkle the topping over the muffins with meticulous care. Jack grinned, a smudge of flour on his cheek, making him look boyish and endearing.
High praise indeed from the muffin master. I'll have you know I'm a man of many talents.
Oh, really?
Emma raised an eyebrow, amused despite herself.
Do tell.
Well,
Jack said, leaning in conspiratorially.
I make a mean grilled cheese. I can juggle, but only if the objects are roughly the same size and weight. Oh, and I once won a kazoo competition in college.
Emma burst out laughing.
A kazoo competition? Now this I have to hear about.
As Jack launched into the ridiculous tale, complete with sound effects, Emma found herself relaxing. Maybe she'd judged him too quickly. Sure, he'd pulled a silly prank, but he'd apologized, and there was something undeniably charming about the way he threw himself into helping her bake. Just as Emma was considering that perhaps this Friendsgiving wouldn't be so bad after all, Jack's phone buzzed loudly. He pulled it out, his face lighting up as he read the message.
Hey, great news.
He exclaimed.
Remember that app I was telling you about? The one that helps kids with chronic illnesses track their symptoms and medication? A major children's hospital chain just agreed to pilot it.
Emma's smile froze.
App? What app?
Jack's enthusiasm faltered slightly at her tone.
Oh, I guess I didn't mention it earlier. It's a project I've been working on. Using technology to improve pediatric care, you know. I thought you'd be interested, given your TED Talk on the subject.
Emma felt as if she'd been doused with cold water. Of course. It all made sense now. His knowledge of her work, his apparent interest in her baking process. This wasn't about genuine connection. He was trying to network, to get an in with a respected pediatrician for his latest tech venture.
I see.
She said, her voice cooling rapidly.
Well, congratulations, Mr. Montgomery. I'm sure it will be very profitable for you.
Jack's brow furrowed in confusion.
Profitable? No, that's not the point at all. It's about helping kids.
But Emma had already turned away, busying herself with cleaning up the baking supplies.
If you'll excuse me, I should get these in the oven. Wouldn't want to keep the other guests waiting for their breakfast.
As she worked, her movements sharp and precise, Emma berated herself silently. How could she have been so naive? She'd come here to get away from work, to find herself again. And instead, she'd nearly fallen for the charm of a tech entrepreneur clearly looking to expand his business contacts. Behind her, Jack stood bewildered, the warmth of their shared moment evaporating like mist in the morning sun. He opened his mouth to explain, to bridge the sudden chasm between them, but the stiff set of Emma's shoulders made it clear that the conversation was over. With a sigh, he hung up the apron and moved towards the door.
Thanks for the baking lesson, Dr. Rossi.
He said quietly.
And for what it's worth, I really did just want to help with the muffins.
As the door swung shut behind him, Emma allowed herself a moment to lean against the counter. The cheerful ticking of the oven timer, a stark counterpoint to the heaviness in her chest. She'd come to Colorado to open herself up to new experiences, new connections. Instead, she found herself retreating behind the same walls she'd built in New York. The scent of cinnamon and apples filled the air, a bittersweet reminder of what had almost been a perfect morning. The afternoon's cheerful chatter in the lodge's great room came to an abrupt halt as Alex burst through the front door, bringing with him a gust of icy wind and swirling snow.
Folks, we've got a situation,
he announced, brushing snowflakes from his Friendsgiving host sweater.
The storm's picking up fast, and
As if on cue, the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the room into darkness. A chorus of surprised gasps filled the air.
Well, that's not good.
Jack's voice came from somewhere near the fireplace. A moment later, the warm glow of his smartphone illuminated his face.
Alex, what's the deal with the backup generator?
Alex's brow furrowed.
it should have kicked in automatically. I'll need to check it out.
I'll come with you.
Jack offered, already moving towards the coat rack. Alex nodded gratefully.
Thanks, man. We could use an extra pair of hands.
His eyes scanned the room, landing on Emma.
Dr. Rossi, would you mind joining us? Might be good to have a doctor along, just in case.
Emma hesitated for a moment, glancing at Jack. Their eyes met in the dim light, a silent challenge passing between them.
Sure.
She said finally.
Happy to help.
As the trio donned their snow gear, Alex gave instructions to the remaining guests to stay calm and gather supplies. Emma couldn't help but notice how Jack took charge, his earlier joking demeanor replaced by a focused determination that was, if she was being honest, rather attractive. They trudged through the deepening snow towards the maintenance building, the wind whipping around them. Emma pulled her scarf tighter, grateful for the warmth of her heavy coat. Inside the maintenance building, Alex flipped switches and turned dials, muttering under his breath.
I don't get it.
He said finally.
It should be working.
Jack peered at the complex machinery.
Could be a fuel line issue. Or maybe the starter motor?
Alex ran a hand through his hair.
You know what? I need to grab the manual. It's in the file cabinet back at the lodge. I'll be right back.
As Alex hurried out, the door slammed shut behind him, its broken spring mechanism causing it to bang loudly. A muffled rumble followed, and then a heavy thud.
Uh-oh.
Jack said, moving to the door. He pushed, but it didn't budge.
I think that slam triggered an avalanche off the roof. We're snowed in.
What?
Emma exclaimed, joining him at the door. They pushed together, but the snow outside held firm. Jack pulled out his phone.
No signal. Great.
Just then, Emma's phone buzzed.
I've got a text from Alex.
she said, relief evident in her voice.
Storm worsening, 0 visibility. Can't safely dig you out now. We'll get help when storm passes. Are you okay?
Jack leaned in to see the message, his breath warm on Emma's cheek. She tried to ignore the little flip her stomach did at his proximity.
Tell him we're fine, just cold.
Jack said.
Ask if he can talk us through getting the generator started.
As Emma relayed the message, Jack began examining the generator more closely.
You know,
He said, a hint of his usual humor returning.
this isn't exactly how I pictured spending my evening. Though I guess there are worse people to be trapped with than a brilliant pediatrician.
Emma rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips.
Flattery will get you nowhere, Montgomery. Though I suppose there are worse companions than a tech genius who can't resist playing pranks with digital turkeys.
Jack clutched his chest in mock offense.
You wound me, Dr. Rossi, and here I thought we were bonding over our shared misfortune.
Before Emma could retort, her phone buzzed again.
Alex says he's got the manual. He's going to walk us through it step by step.
For the next hour, Emma and Jack worked side by side, following Alex's texted instructions. Despite the cold, Emma found herself warming up as they moved around the small space, their bodies often brushing against each other as they worked on different parts of the generator.
Okay.
Emma said, squinting at her phone.
Alex says we need to check the fuel filter next. It should be somewhere on this side?
She gestured vaguely at the generator. Jack leaned in, his shoulder pressing against hers as he peered at the machine.
I think I see it. Here, hold the flashlight for me.
As Emma complied, Jack reached into the generator's innards. His face scrunched up in concentration, a look that Emma found unexpectedly endearing. A strand of hair fell across his forehead, and she had to resist the sudden urge to brush it back.
Almost got it.
Jack muttered.
Just need to oops.
The wrench he was using slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. Both Emma and Jack instinctively reached for it, their hands colliding in midair.
Sorry.
They exclaimed in unison, then laughed at the synchronicity.
Great minds think alike.
Jack grinned, his hand lingering for a moment on hers before he retrieved the wrench. Emma felt a flutter in her stomach at the contact but played it cool.
Or fools seldom differ,
She quipped, earning a chuckle from Jack. As they continued working, Emma found herself growing more aware of Jack's presence. The way he bit his lip when he was thinking hard. The little aha sound he made when he figured something out. The warmth of his breath when he leaned close to examine a part she was holding. For his part, Jack couldn't help but be impressed by Emma's quick thinking and steady hands. At one point, he struggled to loosen a particularly stubborn bolt.
Here, let me try.
Emma offered. She positioned herself in front of him, and Jack's breath caught as she leaned back slightly, her body fitting perfectly against his chest.
I just need a little more leverage.
She explained, oblivious to his reaction.
Can you hold it steady while I turn?
So sure.
Jack managed, placing his hands where she indicated. Together they applied pressure, and with a satisfying grunt from Emma, the bolt finally gave way.
We make a pretty good team, Dr. Rossi.
Jack said, his voice low near her ear. Emma turned her head, suddenly realizing how close they were.
I guess we do.
She replied, a little breathless. They stayed like that for a moment, neither quite willing to be the first to step away. The generator hummed softly in the background, but all Emma could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Finally, Jack cleared his throat.
We should, probably check the next step.
Right.
Emma nodded, reluctantly putting some distance between them. She busied herself with her phone, hoping Jack couldn't see the blush she felt creeping up her cheeks. As the repair work continued, they fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs and movements. When Emma shivered at one point, Jack immediately shrugged off his outer jacket and draped it over her shoulders without a word.
Oh, you don't have to.
Emma started to protest.
I run hot.
Jack shrugged, offering a lopsided smile.
Besides, can't have our only doctor catching a cold, can we?
Emma rolled her eyes but snuggled into the jacket, secretly appreciating both the warmth and the lingering scent of Jack's cologne. Later, as Jack struggled to read the fine print on a component label, Emma couldn't help but chuckle at his squinting.
What's so funny?
He asked, looking up with a mock-offended expression.
Nothing.
Emma smiled.
Here, let me.
She gently took his hand, guiding it to hold the flashlight at a better angle.
Better?
Jack swallowed hard, very aware of her fingers on his.
Yeah,
He said softly.
much better.
As they neared the end of Alex's instructions, the air between them felt charged with unspoken words and growing attraction. Every accidental touch, every shared laugh, every moment of teamwork seemed to be drawing them closer together.
Last step?
Emma announced, reading from her phone.
We just need to reattach this panel and...
Got it.
Jack said, already reaching for the panel. Their hands met on the cool metal, and this time, neither pulled away immediately.
Thanks.
Emma said softly, looking up at him through her lashes. Jack's eyes met hers, a warmth in them that had nothing to do with the physical labor they'd been doing.
Anytime.
He replied, his voice equally soft. The generator chose that moment to sputter to life, startling them both. They jumped apart, laughing nervously.
We did it.
Jack exclaimed, his face lighting up with boyish excitement. Without thinking, he pulled Emma into a hug. Emma stiffened for a moment, surprised, then found herself melting into the embrace. Jack was solid and warm, his arms strong around her. For just a second, she let herself enjoy the feeling of being held. Then, remembering herself, she pulled back.
We, should let Alex know we got it working.
She said, her cheeks flushed.
Right, yes.
Jack agreed, looking a bit flustered himself.
Good thinking.
As Emma texted Alex the good news, she couldn't help but steal glances at Jack. He was nothing like she'd initially thought. Beneath the prankster exterior was a kind, capable man who could apparently fix generators and make her laugh even in the most stressful situations. Jack, for his part, found himself admiring the way Emma's eyes lit up when she smiled, the determined set of her jaw as she worked, the gentle way she'd explained things he didn't understand. She was far from the uptight workaholic he'd initially pegged her as.
So,
Jack said as they waited for Alex's response.
think this counts as a memorable Friendsgiving experience?
Emma laughed, shaking her head.
Definitely not what I expected when I signed up for this getaway.
But not entirely terrible?
Jack asked, a note of hopefulness in his voice. Emma met his gaze, a small smile playing on her lips.
No,
She said softly.
not entirely terrible at all.
As they stood there, surrounded by humming machinery and bathed in the glow of the emergency lights, something shifted between them. The air seemed to crackle with possibility, with unspoken words and growing attraction. Emma's phone buzzed, breaking the moment.
Alex says they'll dig us out as soon as the storm lets up a bit.
She reported.
Looks like we might be here a while longer.
Jack grinned, settling himself on an overturned crate.
Well then, Dr. Rossi, what shall we do to pass the time? I spy with my little eye something beginning with G.
Emma groaned, but she couldn't hide her smile as she sat down beside him.
You're impossible, you know that?
Impossibly charming, you mean?
Jack winked. As they bantered back and forth, waiting out the storm in their little generator room, both Emma and Jack found themselves thinking that maybe, just maybe, this Friendsgiving might turn out to be the best decision they'd ever made.